I keep my journal in a narrow leather-bound book with yellowing pages, the kind that smells faintly of salt and mildew. Every entry begins the same way, because that is how I was trained. Date, time of lighting, weather conditions, visibility. But the longer I remain here, the less those words matter. The date itself is uncertain. The charts in my pocket calendar seem to drift. My watch gains and loses minutes in ways I cannot predict. And yet, each evening, as the mist presses against the iron railings and the gulls vanish into silence, I strike the lamp, and the beam moves of its own accord, turning outward, sweeping across waters where no ships ever pass, toward lanes erased from navigation decades ago. They told me the island had been decommissioned, that it was no longer on the registry, erased from maritime records, a clerical closure. But when I received the posting, the coordinates were written clearly, and a small supply boat deposited me on the jagged rocks of this coast, as though it had always known the way. I asked the captain, before he pushed off, why the island's name was missing from every chart I could find. He didn't answer. He only crossed himself, spat into the water, and refused to meet my eyes. Since then, I have seen no other living soul. The lighthouse groans when the wind presses against it. Rust creeps along the lantern room's steel braces. The spiral stairs creak as if holding the weight of invisible feet. At first, I explained it to myself as the natural fatigue of old wood and metal, but the rhythm of those creaks is too deliberate, like someone ascending slowly, pausing at each step, only to vanish when I force myself to look. The journal is both my anchor and my torment. Each morning when I read the lines I wrote the night before, they do not always match what I remember. Words appear in a hand identical to mine, but shaped with a slightly different pressure. A rhythm of strokes not quite my own. Once I found an entire paragraph describing how I had seen lanterns moving on the sea, lights of distant ships that could not exist. I swear I never wrote it. Yet the ink had bled into the paper as if aged for weeks. The sound is worst at night, when the fog grows dense and the beam of the lamp strains against the dark. I hear the steps again. Not inside the tower this time, but circling outside, on the gravel path that runs from the base to the cliff's edge. Crunch, pause, crunch. A slow, deliberate pacing, as though someone were measuring the ground. Once I leaned out the window to catch a glimpse, but the fog was so thick that even the railing below me vanished. Only the footsteps remained, circling, stopping whenever I held my breath to listen, then resuming when I moved. I try to keep to routine, light the lamp, record the weather, polish the brass, wind the clockwork that turns the lens. The body loves routine. It keeps fear at bay. Yet some part of me knows that the task is hollow. There are no ships to warn, no sailors to guide. Still, the beam insists on swinging to that empty channel, as though some unseen hand forces its path. Sometimes I imagine that if I refused, if I kept the lamp unlit, something would arrive regardless, stumbling blind out of the fog, calling for me to explain why I abandoned the duty. One evening, while cleaning the lower store, I found a box of old journals. They were identical to mine. Same leather, same embossed crest, same faint smell of salt. Inside, the entries stretched back decades, but what unsettled me was not their age. It was their voice. Each entry was written as if by the same man, the same eye that holds my pen now. The handwriting varied slightly through the years, growing steadier, then trembling, then calm again. But the phrasing, the turns of thought, the very doubts were mine. Tonight, the lamp turned to the empty channel again. Heard steps in the fog. If the island does not exist, who requires me to record? Lines identical to what I had written only days earlier. I slammed the book shut, but the echo of those words gnawed at me. Could it be that every keeper before me had written the same? Or was there only ever one keeper, stretched through time, looping through duty after duty, writing his own madness across centuries. At dawn, I climbed the gallery to breathe the cold air. The sea was motionless, like a sheet of lead. No birds, no waves, only silence so complete it pressed against the ears like weight. In that silence, I felt something vast, patient, watching. And when I looked at the pages of the log that morning, I found my entry already waiting there, describing the stillness of the sea. Though I had not yet lifted the pen, I tried an experiment. That night I left one page blank, determined not to write, to break the cycle. I locked the journal in the drawer and carried the key in my pocket. Yet in the morning, when I opened the drawer, the page was filled. My own hand, or what imitated it, had described in detail how I rose from bed, lit the lamp, and stood for hours listening to the crunch of steps circling below. I read and reread those words, trying to convince myself I had written them in a fugue state. But a line near the bottom froze me. He does not believe he wrote this. Sleep comes poorly here. The mattress reeks of damp straw. The walls ooze salt as if the sea presses through them. Sometimes, in the liminal space before dreams, I feel another body lying beside mine in the bed, back to back, breathing with me in perfect rhythm. If I turn, there is no one, but the impression of weight on the mattress remains, and the sheets are warm where no one should be. I wrote to the coast office once, slipping a letter into the supply crate before the boat came. I begged for clarity, who exactly still requires these logs, and why the island is missing from all records. The crate was returned days later with fresh bread and oil, but no reply. Only a note, unsigned, in a sealed envelope. Keep writing, do not stop. The paper smelled faintly of brine, as if soaked in seawater and dried again. Now I am no longer certain whether the act of writing sustains the lighthouse, or if the lighthouse sustains me. Each day feels borrowed, not truly lived, but transcribed in advance. My memories blur. Did I arrive here last spring or years ago? Did the boat truly bring me? Or did I simply wake in the keeper's bed one morning and begin again? Sometimes, in the mirror near the wash basin, I do not fully recognize the face that stares back. The hairline is not mine. The lines around the mouth deeper, older, and yet the eyes seem to plead with me, as if trying to warn me of something I cannot quite hear. The beam of the lamp is steady tonight, cutting across the fog in slow, deliberate arcs. I stand at the window and listen. Below, the footsteps are back, crunching the gravel in circles. Only tonight, there are two sets, moving in opposite directions, meeting, crossing, parting, over and over, like two figures pacing a ritual they have performed countless times. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. I imagine if I joined them, my steps would fit perfectly into the pattern. The journal waits on the desk. My hand hovers over the pen. I do not know whether I write because I choose to, or because the page demands it. The line between memory and record has thinned to a thread. Somewhere beyond the fog, beyond the reach of the lamp, something immense lingers, demanding this ritual of ink and light, sustaining itself through the continuity of these entries. Perhaps that is the true purpose of the lighthouse, not to warn ships, but to feed some vast, forgotten archive with the persistence of my words. I tell myself I am still sane, that I can stop, that I can walk down the spiral stairs, step onto the rocks, and leave the island behind. But each time I imagine the horizon, I see nothing but endless gray, a sea without edge, where no boat could ever come. And I realize the journal is not just my duty, it is my tether. Without it, I would vanish like the island itself, dissolved into fog, leaving only the faint sound of footsteps to circle the stones forever. Still, I write, and as the pen moves, I feel the words shaping me into something else, something patient, watchful, waiting. Perhaps I am not the keeper of the lighthouse at all. Perhaps the lighthouse has been keeping me. The more I try to resist, the more I realize resistance is meaningless here. The island does not bargain. It does not acknowledge refusal. It bends the world around me until I do what it requires. I used to think my duty was to keep ships safe, to shine the lamp into the dark for others. Now I know the task is far more insidious, to keep myself from dissolving. Each page I write is not a record, but a tether, an anchor holding me in form, in identity. Without it, I would scatter into fog like breath in cold air. The discovery came slowly, almost tenderly. I began to notice how the journal predicted me, not just recorded me. A line would appear describing an action I had not yet done, and if I tried to defy it, some subtle compulsion, an ache in my hand, a sudden lapse of memory, would force me to comply. One morning, the log said, "He will walk to the cliff edge and stand there until the lamp turns." I slammed the book shut, determined not to obey. But by dusk, I found myself outside, standing on the jagged edge with spray soaking my coat, my body rigid, my eyes drawn helplessly to the beam as it swung. I stood there for an hour, exactly as written, until the light completed its turn and released me. After that, I stopped testing the book. To resist was to prove its control. To obey at least gave me the illusion of choice. And yet, each time I lifted the pen, I could feel it tightening around me, as though every word not only described me, but hollowed me, leaving only the shell of a man filled with ink. There are nights when the fog grows so dense I can barely see the glass of the lantern room from within. On those nights, the sound changes. The crunch of footsteps multiplies. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, circling, pausing, whispering. The voices are muffled, like water lapping against hollow wood. Once, straining my ears, I caught a phrase clearly, though not in a language I knew. The rhythm, however, was unmistakable. It was the cadence of an entry, like a line being dictated. I realized then that I was not alone in this ritual. Others, unseen, were also keeping journals. A chorus of keepers stretched across unseen shores, all writing, all sustaining some vast network of memory. The thought should have comforted me, but it only deepened my dread, because if they were real, then I was bound to them. And if they were not, then they were only fragments of me, echoing back from a hollow eternity. The most disquieting revelation came when I found my handwriting shifting again, not subtly but fully. One night, after hours of listening to the circling steps, I returned to the desk and discovered the pages filled with lines I could not have written. The script was narrow, cramped, as though written by someone with arthritic hands. The entry described things I had never seen. Storms from decades past. Ships wrecked on shoals that no longer exist. Names of sailors I have never met. But as I read them, memories stirred in me, faint and sorrowful, as though I had once lived them. I wept without knowing why. By morning, I could no longer tell which memories were mine and which belonged to the journal. The transformation is subtle, but I feel it in every gesture. My reflection looks older each week, though the days blur without count. My voice, when I speak aloud, sounds like someone else's. Even my dreams betray me. I dream of ships that never arrive, of families waiting on docks in ports that were dismantled years ago, of voices calling my name across waves. Sometimes I wake with salt crusted on my lips, as though I had been drowned and pulled back only at the moment of waking. What chills me most is the growing sense that the island itself is eroding. Not physically, but conceptually. Its rooms shift when I leave them. The stairwell turns one way, then another. The kitchen door leads sometimes to the gallery, sometimes to the cellar. I once opened a hatch and found only fog beyond, as though the wall no longer contained anything solid. Yet when I returned minutes later, the door opened to stone steps again. The island is becoming what the maps already declare it to be, non-existent. And when it disappears completely, What will become of me? I suspect now that this was always the design. The lighthouse was never meant to guide sailors, not truly. It was meant to house memory, to trap consciousness, to recycle identity through endless pages. A keeper arrives, writes, fades, and the next takes his place. But perhaps they are all the same man, rewritten, reshaped. The journal is the mold into which the mind is poured. And I, by writing, have allowed myself to be recast. I think of the captain who left me here, refusing to meet my eyes. Did he know? Did he see in me the echo of some keeper before? Or was he once a keeper himself, released for reasons I cannot fathom? The silence of his gesture, the way he would not speak, feels now like a warning I was too naive to hear. The culmination came 2 nights ago. The journal, left open, displayed an entry written in advance. It read, "Tonight, he will descend the stairs, open the door to the fog, and walk forward. He will not return, but the journal will continue." I froze, heart hammering. I told myself I would not do it. I would lock the drawer, burn the pages if I had to. Yet when the hour came, I found myself halfway down the stairs before realizing my body had moved on its own. The handle was cold against my palm. I forced myself back, retreating step by step, until I collapsed in the keeper's bed, trembling. All night I lay awake, the sound of steps circling outside louder than ever, as if disappointed. This morning the page had changed. The entry described how I resisted, how I refused, how I delayed the inevitable. It ended with a line that felt less like prediction and more like command. Tomorrow he will understand there is no difference between resisting and obeying. And now tomorrow has come. I sit here, the pen trembling in my hand, writing these words that may or may not be mine. I can hear them outside, closer now, no longer circling but waiting at the threshold. The fog presses against the glass so thick it seems to pulse, as though something vast is breathing just beyond sight. The lamp turns without me winding it, steady, patient, cutting its path through nothing. I realize at last that the transformation is complete. I am no longer the man who arrived here, confused, dutiful, clinging to the idea of service. I am not even certain I am a man at all. I am a voice, a hand, a fragment sustained by the act of inscription. My identity is ink and repetition. Perhaps that is what all of us are. And the island is merely the place where this truth becomes visible. So I write the final line, knowing it may not be final at all, that another version of me will open this book tomorrow and continue without pause. I write it not as a plea, nor as a confession, but as recognition. The island may not exist, but I do, so long as the journal requires me. And when the day comes that the journal no longer needs me, I will dissolve into the fog, my footsteps joining the endless circling outside, pacing the stones in rhythm, waiting for the next hand to take the pen. The page accepts the words, the ink sinking deep, as though the book were swallowing me whole. And for the first time, I no longer resist.